welcome to our Planning Committee meeting today. We have 2 applications to consider along with the report on planning appeals. I'm happy with this and intend to take the business in order in which they're set out on the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Armitage, who's been substituted by Councillor P. Ancliffe, and apologies have also been received from Councillor L. Hartshorn. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disposable pecuniary interests and/or other interests, not already on their register of interests, in any item on the agenda and withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. Do any members have any interest to declare?
None have been received, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to item 3, minutes of the last meeting. We now have the minutes of our meeting held on Tuesday, the 28th of June, 2022. Are we happy that they are a correct record? Thank you. Thank you. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Like this. The main business this afternoon. Before we start, I would like the clerk to explain for the benefit of members, speakers, and those watching on YouTube how we will deal with them.
Thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering the applications this afternoon. The Chair will introduce the applications. As there is no late representations report, the Planning Officer will then give a brief presentation setting out the application plans and photographs from the site. After this, the Chair will ask the speakers to address the meeting. Each of the speakers will have 3 minutes to put forward their views. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of the speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. When we have heard from all of the speakers on an application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate and determination by a vote. The votes will be taken by roll call. After a speaker has addressed the committee and answered any questions, then they will be allowed to remain in the chamber, but they will not be allowed to participate further from this point. Finally, members, this meeting is being live streamed and recording will be placed on the Council's website. Please note that others may choose to copy it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In line with our normal practices, I'm going to ask the planning officers to tell us about any late comments and to give a brief presentation showing any photos and plans of the site. I will allow the officers to complete the presentation. Consequently, members, could you please reserve any points of order or questions about the process to the end? Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, just for clarification, this is on the Clay Cross application.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
So our first application this afternoon is NED/22/00519/FL Clay Cross. Emily, I believe you're leading this.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. May I first confirm that no late representations have been received on this application. In terms of detailing, the application is for the retention of a change of use of a commercial unit to a pet crematorium with associated flue, warehousing and offices at 2E to 2F Churchview, Clay Cross.
Excuse me, could you speak a bit closer to the microphone?
Okay. Members of Planning Committee attended a virtual site visit yesterday where we saw a range of photos of the site. The main consideration for members is the principle of the change of use. There are no technical issues with the application. Next slide, please. Thank you. The first slide illustrates the site shaded in orange to the centre of the screen. The site is located between the Coney Green Road to the west and railway line to the east. The site is situated within the defined settlement development limit of Clay Cross and is also designated as a principal employment area. Just have the next one, thank you. The red line plan denotes the parcel of land subject to the application. The building is situated within a complex of 8 business units known as Churchview Business Park. Have the next one. Thank you. Here we've got a slide showing the elevation and floor plan. The application building is highlighted in red. The only external alteration proposed relates to the flue, which is situated on the northwest facing rear elevation. This measures the maximum dimensions of 2 meters high by 22.5 centimeters wide and is finished in a matte grey colour. Thank you. Here we have a more detailed floor plan. Unit 2E to the left will primarily be used as a warehouse to store items associated with the business, such as urns for ashes and other keepsakes, and to the rear of the unit is a cold store. The right-hand part of the building is Unit 2F and features an office area where the administration side of the business will be taken, with a small associated kitchen and toilet facilities. To the rear is the PET 200 cremator. Thank you. The next few slides are key photos taken from committee site visit, which members attended yesterday. I've included these as a refresher for members. This first photo shows the 2 units subject to the application. To the left, you have the roller shutter and personnel door, which serves the warehouse side to the business. And to the right, you've got the main entrance, which is the office side of the business. And just to the front, you've got the designated parking. Next one, thank you. This last photo is taken from Coney Green Road and shows the flue, which is situated on the rear elevation of the building. That concludes the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will now invite the speakers to address the committee. We have 2 speakers, both in support of the application. They are Richard Slack, the applicant, and Charlotte Stanton, the agent. As the clerk explained, they will each have 3 minutes to get over their points. They will be informed when 30 seconds remain. As members, you can ask them to clarify any matters that have been raised, but remember your questions should only relate to the points which have already been made. I would like now to our first speaker, Mr. Richard Slack, the applicant, to come and address the committee. Can you please confirm that this is your name and that you understand the process?
I do, and it is, sorry.
You have 3 minutes when you're ready.
My name is Richard and my business partner Nick is on holiday, or he would be here too. We're both pet lovers with 2 dogs each. Our local vets are fantastic at delivering a service to poorly pets, but they're not designed to deliver afterlife services. After they have deceased, pets are stored in packed freezers, collected once a week by corporate crematorium, which for most part is out of the region and not returned for nearly 2 weeks without any communication. All in all, pretty undignified for the pet owner and very undignified for the deceased pet. This is why we started Chesterfield Pet Crematorium, to deliver a personal, dignified and fast service to the local area, to offer only individual cremations with CCTV in the work area, to offer collection of pets and delivery of ashes within a 24-hour turnaround if required, to give local residents a choice of afterlife service versus a service offered by vets, still offering a cost-effective service as vets take a large referral fee of about £100 per pet for organising cremations. We're all about delivering a quality local service to the pet lovers of North East Derbyshire. All types of pets are treated with equal respect. The next nearest similar service has just moved from Sutton in Ashfield to Warsaw, and they received planning permission for 2 cremator machines like ours to be sited in their domestic garage at home. We've provided information about our site search in the application. We've considered available properties on the high street, commercial premises, and also our own residential homes. As an industrial unit was a natural choice for the business, and this was confirmed as appropriate by the environmental health officer. The cremation process itself is performed by a DEFRA approved machine, which is energy efficient and reburns smoke and odours prior to its release. All you can see is an occasional heat shimmer, so no impact on our neighbours. This is not a dirty industrial process. The machine itself only takes up approximately 1% of the floor space of the unit. The remainder of the space is our offices and stocks of urns and other memorials that families can choose from our website. Nick and I are North East Derbyshire residents trying to provide a service to pet lovers at a time when they are grieving. Whilst we can't stop undignified afterlife processes that vets have to undertake, we can at least offer local residents a choice. if a business unit at Coney Green isn't appropriate, we're not sure where we're supposed to operate. We ask, please, to support our proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Hancock?
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, sir, just to clarify, because one thing that you said I think is quite significant. In the report that we've got, I know Claycross Parish Council raised a concern about potential fumes. My understanding from what you've just said is that totally isn't actually a factor at all, that it doesn't come
It's
into account.
because it's DEFRA approved and it burns under a certain kilogram weight. It's classed as clean burn technology. So it heats the secondary chamber up to 850 degrees. So any fumes or smoke that pass through that are burnt. So you just literally get a heat shimmer. If you were to stand with your head on top of the flue, you wouldn't smell anything.
Councillor Cooper?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Slack, on that industrial unit, are there any other businesses that produce any smells or anything like that, or smoke? I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, so the building behind us is a big welding company, a fabrication company. So they've got they're blowing fumes out of the roof constantly. Opposite that, there's a big paint spraying car restoration garage that they've got the big paint flues for the paint booths that all the fumes come out. So yeah, there are.
Are there any further, Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. I've received some pictures, I believe, from Charlotte. Is this facility just for small pets? I mean, people keep horses and donkeys and camels and God knows what nowadays. So.
Yeah, it's not for camels or horses. It's for small.
But it is for donkeys.
Yeah, if they were cut it off. No, we only do domestic pets.
Right.
From hamsters, guinea pigs, right up to a Great Dane.
Yeah.
But it's not equine. It's
That's
not what we're looking at doing.
And David's already answered my question on smells. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Ancliffe?
Can I just ask you, when someone comes along and brings their pet to be cremated, is this fired up every day, or is there certain days when you actually cremate? Do you store them, or what actually happens?
We've got a cold store should we need it, but the plan is to cremate every day, because for the efficiency of the appliance, once it's up to temperature, by keep feeding it further animals, it is more efficient than it would be to fire it up from cold, cremate one animal, shut it down, and then start it again tomorrow. So the plan is, it's designed to use 6 to 7 or to cremate a maximum of 6 to 7 pets per day.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Elliott? Oh, no, he's shaking his head.
I was going to ask about it does state in the report about 7 animals, Chair, and I was going to ask about that. So if you're saying you're going to get this thing up to temperature and make it more efficient, surely you'll be doing more than 7 a day.
No, because
or does it? How long does it take per?
It depends on the pet. So the cremator is designed to put your largest, fattest pet in first, because the cremator is designed to use the fats of the animal as a fuel. So once a large animal goes in, it uses the animal as the fuel and shuts all the burners off. So then when it's up to temperature, imagine like a kiln for a pottery. Once it's up to temperature, it's ideal to keep it at that temperature because it's using a lot less fuel. So it's a lot more efficient. So you'd put your largest animal in at the beginning, and at the end of the day, you would put your smallest animal because it's up to temperature and it's actually it's gone. When we say a large animal, a 60 kilogram dog could take anything up to 3 hours. So hence 6 to 7. We wouldn't be doing 6 to 7 60 kilogram dogs.
Thanks very much, Mr. Slack. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Cooper, then Councillor Ancliffe.
how many people will be employed in this business?
Initially, there's going to be 2 people, but we are looking to take that up to 4.5, possibly 5 people. We can't be working on the cremator, collecting pets and working in the office at the same time. So we're hoping to be up to 4.5 to 5 people.
Just out of interest, if I was to bring my dog, say, to be cremated, and I want the ashes of my pet back, how do you separate them? Is there a time limit? Do you let it, how do you deal with that?
So we only offer individual cremations. We're not a production line. We don't want to offer the service where we're putting multiple pets in at one time. So one pet will go into the cremator. When the pet is cremated, we have to wait for a certain temperature before we can open the front door of it, because it burns at 850 degrees. So nobody wants to be standing in front of that door until it cools down to 350 degrees. Then we've got a machine that we can rake the ash out. It's a flat, smooth surface in the bottom. We've got a fireproof brush, metal brush, that every little piece of ash comes out of it. And then once it's cooled down further, then we can put the new pet in, and then we start the process again. Okay. We've put CCTV cameras up pointing at the cremator as well. So if anybody was to challenge us and say, have you put 2 pets in? We can say, well, no, we can prove it to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Liggett, then I think we'll round it up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the cold store, actually, because I was more concerned about the smells beforehand because I was a veterinary nurse. So your cold store doesn't look very big. Is that just because it doesn't?
It's the plan is only to store. That is more of an emergency. So if we had an influx of animals coming in one day and we couldn't cremate them all in the same day, then at least we can put them in the cold store overnight for the next day. But the plan's not to have it stacked full of animals. We don't want to be a production line, and we don't believe we're going to get that influx. It's just as an emergency should we need it, or if pets don't pass away in office hours. No. So if somebody phones us at 11 o'clock at night and they've got nowhere to store the pet themselves, we can then put the pet in our cold store just overnight, and then we can start the cremation the next day.
Thank you. If you'd like to take a seat. Next speaker is Charlotte Stanton. 3 minutes when you're ready, Charlotte.
Thank you. Some of the things I'm going to say you've been talking about, so apologies for any repetition. This property is in the heart of the Coney Green employment area, where, as you know, the council encourages new businesses. Planning permission is only required because of a technicality, as the cremation side of the business does not fit neatly into the business use classes. When Nick and Richard first got in touch with me, my initial reaction was, like the parish council, one of concern about impacts. However, on seeing the cremator and discussing the business, all my concerns were addressed. The cremator has the appearance of a clay kiln at school. It is small and sits in the corner of the industrial unit. We had hoped to show some photos that were submitted with the application, which are these, which I did email out today, and hopefully some of you have seen those. That one in particular just shows the sort of scale of the kiln, which I think is helpful. Sorry, the cremator, which looks like a kiln. The cremator itself is 2.3 metres by 1.1 metres, or 7'6" by 3'7" in old money. The majority of the business is about the personal and dignified service the company delivers. There is no similar business in North East Derbyshire, and possibly even the whole of the county. At the moment, a personal and dignified local cremation just isn't an option to those who sadly lose their pets. Your planning officers have confirmed at 8.14 that there are no objections to the business on the grounds of design or visual impact. At 8.17, it is confirmed that the scheme would not have overriding or harmful impacts on any residential or commercial properties in the area. There have been no local objections. There are no objections on flood risk, drainage or highway grounds. We have submitted technical detailed information, as you've heard, on noise and emissions, and the Environmental Health Officer has raised no objections. As Richard explained, 2 of these cremators are operating successfully from a domestic garage in Warsop. The reason for refusal is not logical in this case. It is based on a very strict policy interpretation of appropriate business uses, which does not accord, in my opinion, with the national planning policies, which seek to encourage all types of business. It also fails to acknowledge that other sui generis uses, such as Motor Seeker UK, have been granted by the council in this area. It is rare for me to visit a client business and be so impressed by the level of care for their customers. They offer the same caring service to the families of all types of family pets. Having studied the available options, I honestly don't think there's a more appropriate location. Granting this business would not harm your employment land supply. Why would it? It provides North East Derbyshire with an important and caring local business, ensures the business unit remains occupied and delivers employment. Thank you.
Charlotte. Are there any questions? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, Ms Stanton. My question is about our policy, WC2. We've heard lots about the services that are provided, the fumes, pet storage, cold storage, but I don't think any of that's been questioned. I think the real issue here is, as it says in the report, it's this WC2, and you say it's a technicality. Do you want to expand more on that? That you think it's just a technicality and it's not logical. So just on that point alone, that's the only point I'm considering out of all of this.
Yeah, and that's what the reason for refusal relates to. Thank you. The issue is that planning permission is needed because it doesn't fit into a B use category. The policy is very strictly restricting business use in this area to B uses and some E uses as well under the new use classes. So we're in a situation where my clients say, well, where are we supposed to go? Because most people wouldn't ideally want it operating in a domestic garage. Most people wouldn't ideally want it operating in a high street. So they're in a situation where an employment area seems the most logical. We appreciate that there's some distinction in the local plan between, in theory, cleaner business areas under WC2 and the general industrial areas, which in theory it could go in. But that we haven't been able to find a suitable location in a general employment area. And the fact is this business wouldn't do any harm in the WC2. So the reason that WC2 is trying to restrict uses is so that it's not preventing or causing problems for other businesses there, which it wouldn't be doing. So the purpose of, you've got to look beyond what the wording of the policy says in terms of the B classes and say, what is the purpose of this policy? The purpose of this policy is to decide whether or not this business is acceptable in this location. And we believe we've demonstrated that it is. I hope that explains. I'm sorry, I've gone a bit round the houses there.
Any other questions? No. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Just one. It's only a quickie. Obviously, we've been talking about what this policy is designed for. You've been to the site. In your opinion, if it wasn't used for something else, would it actually be employing any more people than what they're anticipating?
Well, we don't know the answer to that. Is the honest answer. Another business may well move in there, but it had stood vacant. It was available to lease. To be quite honest, my clients had no idea that their business wasn't a business use that would be welcomed in that location. They're not huge units, no, absolutely. And very often they're used for a significant amount of warehousing, which, as you know, doesn't have a very high number of employees per square metre.
Any other questions? Councillor Elliott.
Charlotte, this probably isn't quite up your street, but I want to go back to emissions and smells, because and I will ask this when we open the floor to the officers, but what I want to know is if there's nothing comes out of this chimney, this flue that is either odorous or can cause any harm, it can't for me be any different to the spray bay opposite or the smoke and stuff coming out of the welding shop. So can you tell me how the emissions are monitored and what they're monitored for on this particular flue?
It's essentially heat that's coming out of the flue. I can confirm that it in many ways is no different to those other businesses, although actually is better, because those other businesses you can smell and you are aware of the operations going on and they are noisy. The key point I think for you is that the environmental health officer has raised no objection. The cremator is DEFRA approved. So these are standard units that can go in and have been tested and have been confirmed as complying with the relevant legislation in terms of their emissions and their noise. So there's a certificate there, literally in the office that I've seen, that confirms that that cremator meets those requirements. So there isn't the necessity to monitor each one, because as long as they're operated as they're supposed to be operated, and why wouldn't they be, then they comply with the requirements of the regulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions? Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Moving on, we now have the opportunity to put questions to the officers about the application. Again, I would like to keep this part of our proceedings focused on getting clarity about any points you're not sure of. Once we have done this, we can then have our discussion about the application based on all what we have heard and read. I would be grateful if you could not move any motions at this stage. Let's wait until we've all had a chance to make our own assessment. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. My question that I've just asked is to Richard and the officers. If this was a brick kiln or a pottery kiln or an exhaust that takes the emissions away from a car workshop or a MOT testing station, would that be acceptable in this position as opposed to a pet crem?
I think the point, the question you make is whether any use that is creating some sort of emission would be acceptable on this site. Is that?
I think the thing is, Richard, if there's a spray bay opposite that's taking fumes out of a workshop, or there's a welding facility that's welding all day and taking the smoke and extracting out into the atmosphere, and this particular, let's call it a kiln, if this particular facility is not presenting any odour and just heat, where is the issue? Or can you tell me the difference between the spray bay and the welding shop and the difference between this that emits just heat as opposed to anything, nauseous or noxious?
I think if you look on page 14 of the site location plan, you'll see that there's the Churchview Business Park with its own access, and that business park is intended in the local plan to be for what we call clean research, development, light industrial uses. I think two questions sequentially that the committee needs to consider in the next phase of the meeting really is, does it want to keep this business park as being for those clean uses? And secondly, that if it does this particular use harm that at all? And we're not taking we're not questioning environmental health at all. We say that it's fine, and indeed, with modern day emissions controls, we wouldn't expect that this to actually be creating anything which is harmful to the air, because the Environment Agency, environmental health, are
cover those things ad nauseum. So we don't see that particular odor or smoke coming from there. We don't imagine that's really going to be a big problem in itself. The fact that this is a type of use that doesn't have a use class and therefore doesn't fit into the type of uses that have been anticipated. So the question, as I go back to the sequential questions, is does the committee want to keep this business park for the types of uses that have been identified in the plan for research development, for light industrial and such like? And if it does this use cause a harm to that for future occupiers, maybe thinking, actually, I don't want to go there because there's a pet crematorium there or anything like that. So it's a fairly simple question or series of questions to ask as to whether or not this is something which you support or not support.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just going to pick up on your on what you said about clean uses. You use those words, clean uses. Well, surely if this is monitored and there's no smoke coming out of this chimney, as we've heard, it's just heat, then surely it is a clean use facility, much so like the welding shop and the spray bay. Is that? I'm just trying to understand the correlation between the businesses and where we would turf this out on WC2, but we don't on emissions from a spray bay or a welding shop. That's what I'm after from you, if that's possible.
Yeah. And as I say, I think as far as this particular use is concerned, obviously it's one we need to concentrate on, is that we have no issue with environmental health's advice that there are suitable controls for emissions to actually make sure that we're not seeing plumes of smoke coming out or a sickening or bad smell coming from there.
Then my question there is purely and solely about if this doesn't fit in what we consider that are those light uses. Is that because that's an oversight from us, or did we ought to see if this does fit in with that, in that bracket? Because all I'm looking for is how we've arrived at refusal, and I can understand where you're coming from because it's not stated in what we state as a light industrial use. But all I can see is that's the only reason.
Yes, indeed, and I think the fact that, as I say, this a crematorium doesn't have a particular use class that would then fit in with the policy. It is what we call a sui generis use, which means it's a use without a particular category, and so that is why it is something which doesn't fit in fairly and squarely with this policy.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hall?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what I was going to ask, I mean, we've been told about other industrial units nearby, like the car workshop, paint workshop and welding. Are they on other industrial estates then, do you know? Oh, sorry, do you want me to repeat that? It was for Richard.
Yeah, I think, as I say, if you look on page 14,
yeah,
you'll see the Churchview Business Park, and I think that the units that have been mentioned by the applicant in the presentation are the units behind there, which is not part of the Churchview Business Park.
Okay.
The Churchview Business Park has its own discrete access and an entrance there. The units behind coming from an access from a different location.
Thank you.
Just checking that whether that is whether the unit that's being referred to as giving out fumes is actually part of the same policy allocation.
They were just, whilst they're checking, I've got Councillor Foster, Councillor Jones and Councillor Cooper. I'll take them in that order.
Thank you, Chair. A question to Mr. Purcell. A lot of what I was going to ask, Councillor Elliott's asked already, but going to policy WC2, and it doesn't say light industrial, which I'll happily have this confirmed. It says general industrial, B8 storage and distribution, and industrial and research. So this application for this use fits none of those. Then we go on to page 91 of the local plan, and it says on 2, where it doesn't fit one of those classes, it'll only be permitted where the proposed use, and then it says A and B, as I'm sure we've all read, ancillary to the main use on that site. So it doesn't follow policy there, and it would not prejudice the future functional viability of employment uses on the site. So I'd like to explore that a little from an officer perspective, how this might prejudice the viability of employment uses on the site. I understand the clean uses, and I understand, I think to me, it sounds like, I'm getting to my opinion here, it's not a statement, but it sounds like the spray booth and the other businesses, it's a bit of a red herring, it's not actually on this site. That's what it sounds like from what I've heard. So what I'm concerned about is the clean uses statement on Churchview Business Park, and how if we were mandated to go against officers' recommendations here, what could happen to this area? How could it affect the viability of employment uses on this particular site? If that's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very difficult to say how it would affect the viability. It's really a case of if someone was coming forward looking for sites on a clean business park for research development uses or for other uses that require clean and quiet environments, when they see this use, would they think, actually, I think I prefer to go somewhere else? Or would they think, actually, I can't see any smoke or fumes coming out from there, it's not really going to affect us. And I think the question is, how do people who are relocating and setting up businesses make those decisions? And is that something that would affect their decision making, and think, well, actually, there isn't anywhere in Clay Cross for us to have clean uses, or this type of business, our type of business, and they look to go elsewhere. And so it's I'm sorry to give a sort of a vague quick answer like that, but it's really how the business people make their decisions about location.
Yeah, if I come back on that, so suppose that what I'm looking for is an understanding of why we as a council and as a planning authority set these clean uses areas out and what they're actually for. So I've got an understanding, and I suppose the committee's got an understanding. It's not that we just don't want to stop a business providing employment, but we've got a duty to provide these areas for other types of clean businesses. So and what I've wanted to move away from is what other businesses are doing in nearby areas and the service it provides. We've got the policy for a reason. So it's that policy and why it's there and what the councillors are needed that policy. It's that explanation I'd like clarity on, please.
Yes, it is. And when you first drive in or walk into Churchview Business Park, straight ahead of you, as you'll see, is there's a digital business, and that sort of starts to set the tone that you would expect to see elsewhere in the estate.
Thank you. And Councillor Jones?
Yeah, it's really, I think it's probably been answered, but I was concerned about the fact that it's a service business, isn't it? We're providing a service for people so they can give their pets a dignified cremation. But I believe there was other sites that were setting out emissions, but there isn't, is there, on that particular area of development? They're all clean. But a lot of those that are in the area are still service, rather than, if you're having your car sprayed as an individual, that's a service. You're not really manufacturing something that's for everybody, isn't it? So I was trying to work out, when do you decide if it's a service or whether it fits in because it's developing something? You understand what I mean?
Yeah, I understand the point you're making. I think the way that use classes are organised is looking at what are the effects of a particular use. And yes, they have to make generalizations about these, and yes, there may be some exceptions. But in general, the situation would be that you know, this type of use is not the type of use that when we set this policy would have in mind.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Councillor Foster asked really the question I was going to ask, but a supplementary on top of that is on this particular part of the site. Then, how many units are currently used, or on the other side is how many are currently empty? Just out of curiosity.
I don't have that information to hand at the moment. No, I'm sorry, we don't have that.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. It's kind of, I think, following on from Mark's thread a bit. Obviously, we've got this policy which is in place. The evidence that we have from DEFRA and from our own environmental health team is that this business is clean. However we want to define it, it is a clean business. The bit that I'm concerned about here is, given what we're told in 99.999% of planning cases, is that we shouldn't be going down the roads of speculation. But I feel that you're almost trying to draw us down that road, because we're saying potentially refuse this because it may put off other businesses in the future, because it may not be clean. But the evidence that we have is that it is clean, but we're still being drawn down this speculation route. So I'm really wanting you to clarify for us what we should be taking from this.
Well, I think every local plan up and down the country will have business park type uses identified for clean research and development, office type businesses. Yes, there will be some other elements that are other uses that would be that can fit comfortably next to those uses, and those are sort of generally sort of prestigious uses that have some sort of symbiotic relationship with each other, and they feed off each other, you know, like any sort of business park or a manufacturing park or whatever. They sort of have they build up relationships between each other and help each other to you know, support each other. So, and then there are general industrial uses where you put the uses that do generate fumes or dust or things that can't be next to these other cleaner uses. And so you'll always have these sort of grades of employment sites across any district. And as I said really at the start, the main question here is, does the council want to keep the Churchview Business Park as focused on being clean office or research development type uses? And if it does this particular use play against that objective, or does it not harm that objective? And I think that's the main question that you need to have ask yourselves in coming to a decision on this application.
Councillor Foster, then I think we'll round it up and move on.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've already just covered some of the, again, some of the question I was going to put to you. But if we look at the two principal, look at the employment areas, we've got the principal employment areas, which is what we're speaking about, WC2, and we've got WC3, general employment areas, where it would be acceptable. So I know it'll be a difficult question to answer, but best you can, Mr. Purcell. Is there a general shortage of general employment areas, WC3 units around the district? Because when you look, there's quite a list there that we've got in the local plan for WC3. So do you see there being a shortage of that?
I don't know if at this point in time, on some of the existing sites, there are vacant units or vacant sites for new units to be built on. And then there are allocated sites for general business as well. Do we have any information about the occupancy rates and vacancy rates of other? No. So we don't have information about all the other vacancies that might be elsewhere.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've done the questions going round and round in circles. So I'd like to open the floor now to debate. Before we move on to that, I think I'd like our clerk to remind us all about the motions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then the amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved which goes against officer recommendations, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reason for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by the evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendation falls, or in other words, it is not passed, that doesn't mean to say that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or a different course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. Now, in terms of the timing of the motions, these should be moved and seconded after the committee has heard, read, and discussed the evidence before it. The chair will indicate when this point has been reached. Members will be reminded of this by the clerk if they wish to propose a motion before then. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Liggett.
Just a comment, really. I've just had a quick look at what businesses are on there. And we've got a plant hire and 2 builders. Are they classed as clean? That was one question. And also, or comment, and also, the only place that I can think that would really object is Jackson's Bakery. They're just down the road because they now have a cafe as well as a bakery, and they've put no objections in. Now, I would have thought if it was going to upset anybody, it would be them.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. I kind of come back to the point I raised with Richard. The evidence that's in front of us is that it is clean. We've been told that by Environmental Health. We've been told that by DEFRA. And we've got to balance evidence over speculation. And there's nothing in front of us that would say someone would refuse to go there because there's a pet crematorium there. So I genuinely don't see any reason to agree with officers' recommendations on this one. In fact, if I'm truthful, obviously that's a motion for later on, but I fully support it if I'm honest.
The floor is open for debate. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Contrary to what Councillor Hancock says, there's no evidence it's clean. All that's happened is nobody's objected. When you look at a DEFRA registered wood burning stove, for example, which is accepted in this area, a DEFRA area, I know this because I've got one. They have to run 87%. So they'll give off 13% fumes. So there's nowhere that says it's clean at all. It will give off some fumes regardless. That's why it's got a flue. So they've got different systems for collecting ash and for collecting some fumes, but essentially any crematorium is going to give off some fumes. It doesn't say anywhere here how much, but you'd expect it to be along those lines. So you've said twice that there's evidence. There is no evidence here at all. I've looked through it all. There's no evidence at all that it's actually clean. There will be some fumes given off. That's the first thing for me. Is it true breathing? Yeah, because we don't breathe out like a crematorium, unless you smoke, perhaps. No, there's no evidence. For myself, I listened to what the planning officer's saying. It seems to revolve around not the service, not what the other businesses are. It's whether we as a council want to keep this area for WC2 businesses, for that appropriate sort of business, and not WC3. So when you look at what we've got, there's a full list in the local plan of all the WC2 areas and all the WC3 areas. And we put that in for a reason, because we want some of these areas to be for clean businesses. If we're minded to ignore it, we can do. Say, okay, we can put whatever business you want in that area, but it'll mean doing it. For me, I know we don't often create precedents, we don't always follow them, but it will mean that someone can come and say, well, there's another WC2 area here. We'll put another one of these in, another type of business like this in that area. We got these in our local plan for a reason. That's what they're for. The guidelines are there, and we've been advised by officers. So it's there is no evidence that it's clean or to say it's dirty, but it's a crematorium. That's my view on it, without putting any emotion as such. I think we've covered everything there. But for me, it's, do we want to keep it as WC2, this area? We either do or we don't.
Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I think we're making this far more complicated than it actually is. I have absolutely no issues with how Mr. Slack may or may not run his business, and I think it'll probably work when it is in an appropriate place. Would be a very successful one. We wish him luck with that. But that's not the issue. It is against our policies. Now, as a committee, we can't pick and choose which policies we're going to enact. We either have them or we don't. And for that reason, I disagree with the agent who says it's a technicality. I don't think it's a technicality, and in 8.9, it's very clear. Would this undermine the strategic approach of the council and prejudice adversely the council's policy on delivering commercial development on appropriate sites? We have decided in the past that this site is there for a reason and has a purpose, hence it's WC2 and not WC3. So for me, I cannot see an issue. We have policies. As I say, we can't pick and choose. And that's my view. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further comment? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. When we've been asking the questions of the officers, and I accept what Mark's looking at there as well, it is there in black and white. But Councillor Liggett has already just said there's a plant hire place on there. I know because I've walked around there a few times. There are mechanics there with stuff sat outside where they're stripping oil and things. So it's not just, if you consider the WC2 is like use of I know Rich said there's a electronics or a computer firm as you walk in, but as you get towards the back of the site, it's not all computers. That's where the plant hire is and the mechanics are and so on and so forth. So, I'm struggling with this one, and I don't think we're trying to make it fit in our criteria. It's just been stated that nowhere is it sat about a pet crematorium on any of our paperwork.
Councillor Hall, then Councillor Foster.
Yeah, I was just going to say I support what Councillor Foster and Councillor Powell say. At the end of the day, if it's an industrial estate that is specific to the use, it says W2, is it? WC2, then that's what it's there for. Yeah, we do have listed companies like where they say building or whatever developments and things, but they could just be the officers for the building companies. It's not to say that they've got piles of bricks and deliveries like that there. That could be just the office for them. But as I say, I do support what Councillor Foster and Councillor Powell say.
Thank you, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. To go back to the last point that's been mentioned, when we look at builders, plant and mechanics, and we're mentioning these as existing businesses on this estate. If we look at what those actually, I don't know if anybody's looked at them. If we look at what the actual definition is under WC2, it does say general industrial use. So storage, distribution uses, office and industrial, research, development uses. So it's a general industrial use. Builders, plant type, mechanics would come under that. So there's no difficulty. That's what it's actually for. And they are relatively clean, what you call clean, because it is general industrial and it's separate to WC3. So they would, all those we've mentioned would come under that existing one.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. I think, and total respect to Mark and Councillor Powell. I think the key thing, which, if I understand what Richard said correctly, part of the problem here is that this actually doesn't comfortably fit in any of the groups that we've got, which is why it's in front of us today. It's not an easy thing. So we're actually having to define, is it compatible with WC2? And that's the question that, as I took from the conversation I had with Richard, that's what we're actually here to decide. And it's whether members feel, yes, it does sit comfortably alongside that, or no, it doesn't.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry to come back, but that's a bit of a red herring. It does fit in one. You're not saying it doesn't fit. No, it fits quite clearly under WC3. Well, I'd ask the officer then, does it fit under WC3?
Richard.
Well, I think as I said, the question is, does it, does the council want to keep this business use for the purposes that it was intended? And if it does this particular use conflict with that or not? And clearly, some members believe that it does, and some members believe that it doesn't. I mean, we've made our recommendation, and given the reasons why, as stated in the report, the due and proper process now is for members to decide whether they agree to that. And for something like this, it doesn't surprise me that there are these different views. And indeed, that's, apart from it being called to committee, that sort of is one of the reasons why it is for the committee to make that decision.
Thank you, Councillor Foster.
Sorry to come back again. I'll answer my own question. I found it and it was there. 8.8, conversely, policy WC3 identifies that those other employment sites were the non-B class employment generating uses, this one, and potentially including uses such as a pet crematorium would be acceptable. So it's there. We've got it in black and white. Page 19, 8.8. It would be acceptable under WC3. That's the only point I'm taking. It is a debate, and it's a point I'm trying to make. It's not that the other uses on this site do come under WC2, and if you read the policy, they come under WC2. This one doesn't. It fits under WC3, and I think the question is, much like we've heard from the officer again, it's whether we want to keep this as a WC2 and allow a WC3 type business into it. So I think that's fairly clear.
Okay, thank you. I think we've done the subject, dare I say it, to death. And I'm going to ask for motions. Councillor Hall?
With officer's recommendation.
I'd like to
please.
second that.
Motion then is to approve, well, the officer recommendations to refuse the application. Yes. I should now take a roll call, Chair, if that's okay. Councillor Ancliffe. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hancock, Councillor Liggett,
Against.
Councillor Jones,
Against.
Councillor Powell, Councillor Rouse,
For.
and Councillor Ruff.
For.
That's 6 for and 5 against. The motion is carried, Chair.
Thank you. We can move on to the second application of the afternoon, which is at Higham, and that's NED/22/00508/FL. Shall I hand this over to, I believe it's Bill?
Thank you, Chair. Just give me a second. Okay. This is an application to remove condition 12, which restricts the permitted development rights. The dwelling is a former barn and workshop that has been converted to a dwelling and retains many elements of its former agricultural character and lies within the conservation area. The application is recommended for refusal in order for the council to retain control of future alterations, ensuring the continued protection of the building and the character of the conservation area. Have the first slide, please. Thank you. This is an aerial photograph of the site, with the site in the centre. It lies close to the junction with the A61 and Main Road and is accessed by a private drive to the west of Main Road. This is a red line application site plan, again showing the barn in the centre of the plan. This shows the extent of the Higham Conservation Area, with the barn located within the northern part. In these areas, there is statutory duty placed on the council to have regard to preserving the conservation area. This is a photograph of the eastern elevation of the building taken from Main Road. This is a closer photo of the eastern elevation. There was an appeal dismissed in 2019 for re-roofing with solar PV roofing slates. In the decision, the inspector stated that the natural slate roofs contributed positively to the character of the conservation area, and that most of the traditional buildings within the conservation area either have slate roofs or stone tile roofs. This is a photo of the western elevation of the building. Again, in the previous appeal, the inspector commented that the building retains many elements of its simple agricultural character. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And we've got one speaker, I believe, for this afternoon. So Mrs. Fiona Cropper, sorry, I do beg your pardon. You understand you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to speak with reference to our application to have permitted development rights reinstated. We live in Higham Conservation Area. However, houses in conservation areas generally have permitted development rights. And in fact, permitted development rights are already somewhat restricted in conservation areas. You can't build at roof level, for example. Suggesting that the government's attention is that permitted development rights should apply in conservation areas, but in a more restricted way. Our local councillor asked the planning department for clarity on this matter, and our legal team advises that the case officer's email to the councillor reveals that they are still not applying the government's guidance. The council is simply not allowed to take away permitted development rights automatically on all new conversions in order to retain control over future development. They have no right to control over future development unless there are rare and unusual circumstances about that site that warrant the removal of rights. Let's look at if our property in question has rare or unusual circumstances. Background. Built in 1860 is an animal barn on farmland, converted to a car garage and mechanics workshop in late 1950s. Sold in 1998 with permission for conversion to dwelling. Planning rights removed at this point. Situation. Sits well back from the main road, partly obscured by large trees. Is it a listed building? No. Does any aspect of the building or plot have rare or unusual features? No. Does it have any historical significance? No. Therefore, it does not fall into the government's guidelines of warranting removal of planning rights. The Planning Development Manager, in his email to our local councillor, refers to control over the integrity of those buildings and the contribution they make to the character of the area in which they are located. Since making the conversion to dwelling, we have made many improvements to the character of our property, using local and natural materials wherever possible, adding traditional design double oak-fronted garages. We've made investment in local stone masonry and pointing of exterior walls. We've removed non-native plants and
30
installed
seconds remain.
a natural English hedgerow in order to conserve not just the local ecology and environment, but also our national heritage. In short, we have added and will continue to add to the character of the building and how it sits in the area. We are extremely aware of aesthetics and we are sympathetic to the natural area and how our house sits in it. We ask you, the Planning Committee, to look carefully at the evidence and make an informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? No, thank you very much. Would you like to take a seat? We now have the opportunity to put questions to the planning officer, if there are any. Councillor Elliott.
Sorry, Phil. Could you just give us a bit of a heads up on this one? Because when I read the reason for refusal and it relates to the barn and the workshop, now it's being converted into a residential property. Does that PDR not come off? Or is the development rights on the building, whatever it is, or does it relate to what it was?
The permitted development was removed at the time of the application for the conversion, and the reason being is so that we can preserve that agricultural character for any future extension. So that was why it was removed. But yeah, it was a former agricultural barn, then a workshop, then it was converted to a dwelling. But you can see from the photos that you can see that it looks like a barn conversion, which is what it was.
And that's where I'm at with it, Phil, really. I mean, for me, they've kept it looking aesthetically fabulous.
Absolutely, it's a beautiful building, yeah, no doubt about
that. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just really to follow up on what the applicant's actually been saying about the justification as to why the permitted development's been removed when it doesn't really seem to fit any of those categories. And if you can expand on that.
Well, the permitted development was removed in 98, 2000 when the application was granted. So yes, it was a long time ago. But I mean, as set out in the report, we consider that given that it's a former conversion, it's in a conservation area, it's retaining that character, that it's reasonable and justified in this case to continue removing the PD. It's also backed up to a degree by an inspector's decision which made reference to the stone roofs and the contribution and the natural materials. Yes, but the application was made because the permitted development rights were no longer there.
Are there any further questions whilst I'm going through? Councillor Powell?
Just for clarity, in that we understand what the situation could be in the future. If we were to remove this condition, it would still be open to the applicant to make any planning application should they want to do any further work on the building.
If the application was allowed and the permitted development was reinstated, you mean? Or
no, if we say we want to keep the condition,
yeah,
could at some future time the applicant then say, well, I've got an idea that I'd like to do this or do that? It would still be open to them to apply to the council to do that.
Absolutely.
So we're not removing any right.
No, absolutely. We're not saying you can't extend the property. All it's saying.
Thank you. I just think that's quite an important element.
And any application just needs to be made to the authority.
And incidentally, that will be a free application. They wouldn't have to pay an application fee for that because it's a free application when permitted development rights have been removed. So they're not hindered in that way.
I have a quick question. Has there been any reason for it to be removed, stated, that they want it to be removed, i.e. if they got some building work, etc.?
There's nothing specific in the application as to why they want it. There's no sort of project that they've said. They've just said that, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I go to the last page of this application, reason for refusal, that last paragraph, we've just heard that that we'd still have to go, that the applicant would still have to, if they wanted to build, they'd still have to put a planning application in. But here it says the removal of the permitted development rights. So just to explain to me for clarity, remain justified in order for the local planning authority to retain control of any additions to the building, ensuring the continued protection of the historic character. What more controls do we have if it's left in place?
If it's left in place, then the permitted development rights are removed for extensions, additions or alterations to the roof, porches and curtilage buildings. So anything under that umbrella would require an application to the local planning authority.
Any other questions? No, thank you. Okay, I'll open the floor for debate if there is going to be one. Looking at some very blank faces now. If not, I'll move it that it's open for the floor for motion. I'm quite happy to go with officers' recommendations.
Second motion.
Okay, Chair. Okay, Chair. So the motion is to approve officer recommendations. I'll now do the roll call, Chair. Councillor Ancliffe. Sorry, was that 4? Councillor Cooper. Councillor Elliott. Councillor Foster.
4.
Councillor Hall.
4.
Councillor Hancock. Councillor Liggett.
4.
Councillor Jones.
4.
Councillor Powell. Councillor Rouse.
4.
And Councillor Ruff.
4.
The motion has been carried, Chair.
Thank you all very much. We'll move to item 6, late representations, or we've already done that, so we can move on. Item 7, planning appeals lodged and determined. Over to you, Richard.
I think the report speaks for itself for appeals that have been lodged, appeals that have been allowed and the appeals that have been dismissed. Really, it's a case of if there are any specific questions about any of them that members have.
Are there any questions? No, lovely.
Chair?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, are we on 1.2, appeals allowed?
Yeah.
If you could ask for a few more details on that, if you know some, please.
Yes, this one was, it's an unusual site actually in the Holmesfield Horsley Gate Conservation Area. It was for a small stables and tack room, which the inspector concluded was appropriate facilities for outdoor sport and recreation, whereas it differed from our conclusion because also on that site there was a stone-built stables that have now been converted to a dwelling. But I can find out more details if you wish.
Any other questions? No. Final item is matters of urgency. I have no matters of urgency, so I thank you all very much for your attention this afternoon. Thank you.